If you can sit in a room full of people losing their minds over sports and feel almost nothing, there may be nothing wrong with you at all. Your brain may simply refuse to feed on the kind of borrowed emotion that most people get addicted to. To put it more bluntly, a lot of people are not watching sports just to watch sports. They are using it to feel a rush, to feel part of something, to stand inside a tribe, and to give their heart a socially acceptable reason to beat harder. You do not respond to that kind of stimulation the same way. And the most uncomfortable part is not the game. It is the way people look at you like something is off, just because you are not vibrating at the exact same frequency as the crowd. But this is the part worth hearing. It is not that you feel less than they do. In many cases, you just do not like handing your emotional system over to something that gives you no real power, no real effect, and no real stake in your own life. You do not hate sports. You hate the feeling of being pulled into a collective high and then being silently expected to care. And if that sentence hits you, then this video is not pointless at all, because we are not really talking about preference anymore. We are talking about the three things underneath it. Why some brains get pulled hard by the feeling that something big is about to happen. Why some people are deeply resistant to investing emotion in places where there is no real reciprocity. And why a lot of people think they love sports, when what they really love is the feeling of being on the same side as the crowd. That is the real hinge. So, let's go straight into the first point. Why does sports pull so many people in so deeply? It is not because the game itself is magical. It is because it gives the human brain three things that are very hard to refuse: a side to belong to, a state of anticipation, and an unpredictable reward. You pick a team, and the brain instantly gets a sense of, these are my people. You wait through every possession, every near miss, every shift in momentum, and your nervous system gets suspended in anticipation. Then the result lands without warning, and the brain gets the kind of reward it is built to chase. That is why a lot of people do not just watch, they get pulled in. And if you do not get pulled in, that is not a small detail. It often means your brain does not open easily to emotional peaks that your real life cannot actually touch. You want emotion with more friction, more relevance, more reciprocity. That is why one person can spend 3 hours living and dying by a scoreboard, while another person looks at the exact same scene and thinks, am I being invited to care, or am I being pressured to care? That one question alone separates these two types of people by a huge distance. And from here, everything starts to become clearer, because the next part goes straight into the first mechanism. Why many people are not most addicted to sports itself, but to the feeling of waiting for something to explode. That anticipation matters more than most people realize. In one neuroimaging study on football fans, moments tied to a love team recruited reward in emotion-related regions, including the ventral tegmental area and substantia nigra. That does not mean sports fandom is some simple pathology. It means the brain can treat those moments like emotionally meaningful rewards. The screen is external, the reaction is not. And that is where the first split shows up. For some people, that setup is irresistible, a side to belong to. A score that can turn at any second, a reward that arrives unpredictably. That is almost a perfect machine for suspended attention. You are not acting, you are waiting, and waiting itself becomes the charge, which is why a lot of people are not most attached to the sport itself. They are attached to the feeling that something big could happen in the next 10 seconds. But that still does not explain why some people stay almost untouched by it. Here is the stronger explanation. Some people do not reject intensity. They reject one-sided intensity. Parasocial research has described these bonds as psychologically meaningful, but structurally one-sided. You can feel attached. You can care deeply. You can build routine, emotion, even identity around the connection. But there is no real reciprocity in the ordinary sense. Nothing on the other side is actually in relationship with you. And that may be one of the cleanest ways to understand the person who never gets hooked by sports culture. It is not that they cannot feel, it is that their emotional system asks a harder question before investing. Does this come back into my life in any real way? Does this ask something real from me? Does this return anything except intensity? If the answer is no, they often stay outside it. Not because they are superior, because they are less willing to pour energy into something that gives them arousal without agency. Now add another layer. A lot of sports attachment is not born in isolation. It is amplified socially, in real time. Recent research on spectator value co-creation found that the experience is shaped not just by the event itself, but by atmosphere, word of mouth, and spectator interaction. That means part of what people call the thrill of the game is often the thrill of synchronized reaction. The crowd helps manufacture the charge. Social media extends it. Conversation keeps it alive after the final score, which explains something most non-fans feel but rarely say out loud. Sometimes what exhausts them is not the sport. It is the pressure to perform, belonging around it. The room jumps. The group leans in. Everyone is speaking one emotional language. And if you are not fluent in that moment, people notice. That is why some people do not just feel uninterested. They feel cornered. They feel like they are being asked to prove they are part of the room by carrying on command. That is not a sports problem. That is a belonging problem. And there is evidence that belonging really is part of the engine. A 2025 study found that social exclusion positively predicted intention to engage in experiential sports consumption, with the need for social connection acting as a significant mediator. Read that carefully. In many cases, people are not moving toward the event only for the event. They are moving toward reconnection, toward shared rhythm, toward relief from standing outside the social circle. So now the split becomes much clearer. One person looks at sports and sees spectacle, tribe, rhythm, release. Another person looks at the same thing and sees a high that depends on emotional outsourcing. One person says, "This makes me feel alive." The other says, "This asks for too much of me while giving me nothing I can actually touch." Same event. Different utility. And this is where I want to be fair, because the shallow reading would be, sports fans are just manipulated and non-fans are more evolved. That is lazy. There is research suggesting that watching sports can support well-being through social interaction and emotional experience, and that attending live sporting events is associated with higher subjective well-being and lower loneliness in some contexts. So no, this is not a story about one side being deep and the other side being empty. Sports can give people something real. Connection is real. Shared emotion is real. Relief from loneliness is real. The real difference is simpler than that. Some minds are more open to synchronized emotion. Other minds want emotional investment to come with reciprocity, agency, or direct relevance. That is why one person can spend 3 hours living through a scoreboard and feel nourished by it, while another person feels drained just watching the crowd attach themselves to it. And there is one more refinement worth making. Older theories of fandom often leaned heavily on social identity alone. More recent work argues that identity fusion can explain the deeper emotional and relational intensity of sports fandom better than identity alone. In plain English, some people do not just support the team, they feel bound to it, closer to personal extension than casual preference, which means the person who does not obsess over sports may not simply have less tribe in them. They may just never enter that fused state in the first place. That difference matters, because once you stop calling them boring, a different picture appears. They may be protecting attention more carefully. They may be less responsive to one-sided emotional structures. They may need a stronger bridge between feeling and real life before they commit. And next time you are in a room where everyone starts rising with the same wave, try one quiet check before you follow it. Ask yourself, do I want the game, or do I want what the game is letting me borrow right now? That one question will tell you more about your psychology than the final score ever will.